Hey folks, today we are back at it with another AI history app. Unlike the app in my last video that lets you talk to historical figures in the form of a text chat, this particular AI app allows you to talk to artifacts. The Living Museum AI was launched in October, just a few short weeks ago, and I originally heard about it on the Museum Pros subreddit. And this subreddit, composed of museum professionals at various points in their careers, responded negatively. I want to tell you about this app, what it does, the ethical implications, and then I want to pass it off to you, because this is a very different can of worms than my last video where I discussed AI applications in history, though you should also check that video out as well. Before we begin though, please allow me to introduce myself as Christia, someone who loves talking about museums and niche historical topics. So this app is called the Living Museum. And I gotta be honest with you, I already kind of have beef with the name because living museums are already a thing that exist and they have nothing to do with artificial intelligence. In case you weren't aware though, traditionally, a living museum or a living history museum allows visitors to walk through original or reproduced historical structures and speak with people who are dressed in period-accurate clothing and doing period-accurate things and generally acting as if they are from a specific time in history. Personally, I feel like using AI to interpret artifacts is taking any life out of the conversation, but hey, that's just me. So the Living Museum app is actually a website, which I will say is way better than any of the historical figure AI apps that I downloaded for my last video. I like that I don't have to download anything, I can just access it via web browser. I haven't found any articles discussing this app, but I believe it was created by somebody named Jonathon Talmi, or at the very least, his name is the only one that's on the About page that contains a lot of I statements. Something very relevant to this upcoming conversation that I want to mention is that it does not appear that Talmi has a background in museums or education, and he seems to be approaching this project as somebody with just like a strict tech background. Talmi described the launch of this program on Twitter as an experimental interface for the British Museum that brings its digital collection to life using AI. Oh yeah, by the way, this artificial intelligence is trained off of the British Museum website, specifically their online database. However, it is important to note that according to the Living Museum, this site is not affiliated with or endorsed by the British Museum. So just to be clear, the dataset that this artificial intelligence was trained off of was created by the museum and not the guy who developed the AI. The Living Museum was created by using publicly available data that has been painstakingly compiled by British Museum staff. The descriptions they wrote out, the dimensions, and all of that other extraneous kind of collections information, and even those beautiful high-resolution photographs were all created by the museum. On the Living Museum website, when you go to the chat option on any particular artifact, you can also click on the metadata option, which has an acknowledgement that the descriptions and all of the details are from the British Museum, and it matches up with the info that is provided on the museum website, mostly. I'm not familiar with international copyright law, so take this with a massive grain of salt, but I don't think this is illegal. I just think it's kind of a shitty thing to do. Just because you can use the British Museum's collection data for an AI chatbot doesn't mean that you should. I really want to know why Talmi created this. Like, was it meant to be pitched to the British Museum who would potentially purchase it and use it in their programming? Or did Talmi just really want to see what he could create with this data set? I don't know, and I suppose only time will tell. There is a lot about this app that gets my hackles up, and we'll discuss that in a minute. But this app purports to accomplish or fulfill two different functions. The Living Museum is an experimental user interface for the British Museum, which aims to show how these technologies could be used to craft engaging experiences for museum visitors and people at home. First, we allow visitors to curate personalized exhibits by searching the collection using natural language. Second, we use large language models, or LLMs, to bring artifacts to life, allowing visitors to feel their presence and learn about history through dialogue. I hope this project demonstrates that technology like AI can increase immersion, thereby improving educational outcomes without sacrificing authenticity or factuality. Oh boy, I sure hope it doesn't, but I guess we'll see. Okay, so this is an experiment, and I can respect that. Like I laid out in my last AI video, I'm not totally against the use of artificial intelligence in museums and the study of history. I just think it needs to be used cautiously and sparingly. But is this app really necessary? Or is it creating a solution to a problem that doesn't exist? What ethical considerations need to be taken into account when creating an AI that speaks for artifacts? The introduction says that it will allow users to do two different things: create an exhibit and bring artifacts to life. So let's examine these, break them down, and see how they compare to your classic museum going experience. But first, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Carr McLean. Carr McLean is a family-owned Canadian business that sources and supplies a wide variety of products to schools, libraries, archives, and museums. They have lots of handy materials for family historians who want to protect photo albums and heirlooms, acid-free storage options for vintage clothing and antiques, and also a wide selection of personal protective equipment to keep us all safe when handling the weird and sometimes dangerous things that our ancestors leave behind. They have a brand new website and add new products weekly. So if you are someone with antique or vintage items that you want to protect, they ship everywhere in Canada. Thank you to Carr McLean for sponsoring this video. When it comes to visiting museums, Talmi has this to say: "The museum-going experience has remained largely unchanged in my lifetime. Curators use art and historical artifacts to tell stories about people, places, and things. Visitors passively explore exhibits with little room for interactivity outside of guided tours." Okay, so I just want to tear this apart really quick because this is just factually incorrect. He mentions that there is little room for interactivity outside of guided tours, but if we are talking about the British Museum as our case study here, there is plenty of evidence that points to the contrary. For example, I went to the British Museum in the spring and I went and saw their brand new Roman Army exhibition, which I did a review of if you want to hear more about it. And this exhibition was filled with tons of interactive bits for kids and adventurous adults. There were games, things you could touch, move, lift, and, interact with. Also, more generally, museums have tons of different ways that they engage visitors. I'm not currently in outreach or exhibits anymore, but at my last job at Point Ellis House, we did everything from craft workshops, lectures, scavenger hunts, and I did these really fun special guided tours where I would actually bring artifacts out of storage and craft a special tour where people got to see items that they wouldn't otherwise be able to see, and they were able to see them up close and with the assistant curator who was able to explain kind of their role within the museum. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that museums can engage visitors. I will concede that the permanent exhibitions at the British Museum aren't the most interactive, but to say that the museum-going experience hasn't changed in the last few decades is horrendously out of touch with what museums are currently doing. I again want to mention that this guy does not appear to have a background in education or museums, so this is all a little insulting. While this may not have been his intent, Jonathon Talmi has essentially walked into this field, taken a look around and said, "You're all doing it wrong," and plopped an AI chatbot that nobody asked for at our feet. But with this living museum AI, Talmi says that visitors, which I feel weird using that term for a website, are able to create and curate an exhibit using this particular AI. He says, "You can filter the collection using metadata or dream up an entirely new exhibit using your own words. To use the natural language search, try searching for specific objects, like clothing from China, general themes, like life in the times of the pharaohs, or abstract concepts, like cats or yellow, which will create exhibits that weave together artifacts from different cultures and time periods." I think the word exhibits is doing a lot of very heavy lifting here, because this is essentially a glorified search engine, and it doesn't even really do that effectively. Not to mention the fact that every time you search for something, it's going to give you multiple results. So if you're looking for just one thing, you'll have this wall of images, and you'll have to dig through them to find what you're actually looking for. Whenever I was looking for a specific artifact, I was usually eventually able to find these items, but it was through some very clever keyword searches and it was not easy. But also, when I tried to look for this mask that is legally within the collection of the British Museum, and it's on their collection search, I could not find it anywhere on the Living Museum website, and I tried searching for it with various keywords, including the museum number and the cultural group, but it was nowhere to be found. So, you can search up one of these topics or a specific artifact, and they will maybe show up on your screen with these beautiful high-resolution images from the museum, of course, in an endless loop. And that's the exhibit function. I'm not kidding, that's it. A museum exhibition isn't just a bunch of artifacts. Yes, an exhibition usually contains artifacts, but they are specifically chosen, curated, one might even say, because of their narrative value and how they are able to add to the story that the exhibition is trying to tell. It will have text that explains this message, describes the relevancy of the artifacts, and yes, Talmi, there will be interactive bits, whether it's as complex as a touchscreen or as simple as a printed I Spy handout. I love those things, by the way. Simple, cheap, and if your museum has an I Spy, you bet your butt I'm doing it. But with this idea, we're once again seeing the utter lack of understanding of what an exhibition is, how you make one, and the experience that museum staff and historians bring to the table that make them interesting and worth visiting. The very first exhibit or search I tried to create with the Living Museum was about stolen items from the British Museum's collection. Because in that introduction that I read to you earlier, it said that this app could handle general themes as well as abstract concepts, so I put it to the test and was disappointed. The exhibition it created displayed lots of bits of metal from the Stanwich hoard, and when I asked one of them through the chat function if they had been stolen, it replied, "No, I wasn't stolen at all. In fact, I was carefully recovered through proper archaeological channels and legally acquired under the Treasure Act." I asked another fragment the same question, and there must have been a glitch or something because it seemed to have stopped computing halfway through spitting out an answer, and it just said, "No, I wasn't." Talmi claims that you can use more complex keywords to create these exhibits, but when the app is asked about something that the British Museum is well known for, stolen items, the Living Museum almost seemed confused and provided a number of ethically sourced artifacts. One of the more common problems I've seen with usage of AI in academia is that sometimes it will just produce a citation out of thin air, fabricating entirely false data. This reminds me of what's happening here because the Living Museum is confusing the data and saying that these ethically sourced artifacts were in fact stolen. Using the terms stolen objects yielded a better result with images of the Benin bronzes, but this really highlighted how lacking this function is as an exhibition. I'm presented with this wall of artifacts, but what ties them together? Why is it important to talk about items that were stolen during bloody conflict? Another exhibition that I tried to put together using this app was, I thought, going to be a really simple one. It was a single keyword. I thought it was going to, I was trying to give it a win, The keyword that I used was potlatch. The items that appeared in the Living Museum once I hit, enter, were from all over the place, most of which were not even from First Nations in Canada. While I was shown one or two items from the correct cultural areas, I was also showed a pot from Nigeria, a portrait of a Polynesian chief, and many other random items from different cultures around the world that have nothing to do with the potlatch. Just to do my due diligence and make sure that this wasn't coming from, an error on the British Museum's dataset, their collection website, I went to their collection search and typed in potlatch and was shown a number of masks and other items used in these ceremonies from the correct cultural groups, which proves it was the Living Museum that failed to execute this simple search. If this is what Talmi thinks a museum exhibition is, I gotta know what exhibitions he's been to, because this function is utter trash. According to this tweet from Talmi, the Living Museum app is giving people the chance to become curators themselves, and then learn about history through conversation. I hope visitors can build more meaningful, lasting connections with the past than they can with today's relatively passive experiences. I think the general perception is that museum work is very cutesy. It's very easy. Anyone can do it. Just throw some things in a room and say, "Hey, look, it's my exhibition." Hi folks, welcome to my Yellow Jug exhibition. And I think that idea really diminishes and devalues the work that museum staff put into exhibitions. I'm not mad at the idea of giving people the opportunity to become curators and take part in creating an exhibit. But this isn't what a curator does, and this is definitely not a museum exhibit. The Living Museum app feels very regressive. It's claiming to be this revolutionary way to interact with museum collections and the, quote, unchanged museum-going experience. But the exhibit function of this app is actually removing all of the work that has been done over the years to make museums engaging and educational, stripping the very essence of what a museum is down to its least interesting parts. In an attempt to create something new, Talmi has instead reinvented the first modern museum. A curiosity cabinet in an upper-class drawing room was filled to the brim with objects that were vaguely interesting to look at or similar in nature, instead of being united by a story that ties them all together. Now, the exhibition curation, if we can even really call it that, was just one of the two functions that the creator was trying to tout for this app. It was also claimed that the Living Museum AI would allow you to speak with artifacts from the British Museum collection. When you click the chat button, it opens a dialog box where the artifact introduces itself. The app encourages you to start a chat and ask about an artifact's origins, significance, and historical context, or anything that comes to mind, and you are provided with a number of possible questions that you might want to ask. I will say that this style of interpretation is not new to museums. I've seen it several times before where an item is interpreted as if it has a voice and can tell its own story, but this is used very cautiously in museums for reasons that we will come to in a moment. Personally, I find it somewhat hit or miss on whether this method of interpretation actually hooks me and is effective at conveying information, but when it works, it works. So the idea here isn't what I'm upset with, but it's the execution and the ethics behind it. One of the bigger issues I kind of foresaw having with this Living Museum app was the fact that there are many contentious items in the British Museum's collection. The point of this function is to anthropomorphize objects, to give them a voice and have them tell their story. And so I asked a Moai from the Rapa Nui people if it was stolen. The app representing the artifact replied, "Well, stolen might be a strong word, but I was certainly removed from my sacred home during the HMS Topaz expedition in 1868. Oh boy. Captain Powell's crew transported me from Orongo to Europe, and I was eventually gifted to Queen Victoria, who then presented me to the British Museum in 1869. My people might have seen it as a loss." I want to be explicitly clear here that the Rapa Nui people did not give this item to the English, and they want him back. And the fact that the AI is kind of trying to downplay this is kind of heartbreaking. Like, this is just, it's so wrong. Having an AI speak on behalf of an artifact also brings up another ethical dilemma that I highly doubt Talmi considered. Many cultures around the world, including the Rapa Nui, believe that certain sacred objects carry a spirit and therefore already have a voice. These statues, called Moai, are believed to represent and carry the ancestors, and by applying artificial intelligence to these sacred stolen items, by forcing a voice upon them, it's a very colonial mindset, which is something that museums around the world are actively trying to move away from. But I don't think Talmi stopped to think about how a culture, a nation, a people who had their belongings and their sacred objects stolen from them during times of conflict would react to having an item or an entire culture being interpreted by an AI trained on a data set created by the people who did the stealing. I also don't think Talmi considered the ethics of allowing an AI to speak on behalf of human remains. That's right, folks, you too can speak to the desiccated corpse of someone who lived 2,000 years ago. I've spoken about the display of human remains in museums on this channel before, but human remains have mostly been removed from exhibition due to the ethics surrounding their display. First off, human remains were also taken during times of conflict and conquest, removed from their places of rest against the wishes of their descendants. If they weren't stolen, they may have been sold and purchased in the environment created during that conflict. We've already discussed how having the AI speak on behalf of artifacts is applying a colonial mindset, but now we are applying this to the actual remains of a person. In my last video about AI and history, I mentioned that historians walk a fine line of ensuring that they are not speaking on behalf of a person. And these AI chatbots tend to just disregard this ethical dilemma entirely. We have been shown repeatedly that AI cannot be used to accurately represent historical figures in its current state. And to have artificial intelligence use real human remains as a sock puppet to make them speak feels extremely wrong and unethical. The British Museum seems to be very transparent about the human remains in their collection, and there's a lot of reading material about human remains in museum collections available on their website, including Regarding the Dead, Human Remains in the British Museum, and this bit from Chapter 5 really stuck out to me, and I would just want to share it with you. If museums are going to continue to benefit from the public's trust and support, they must make sure that the human remains held in their collections are always handled, stored, and transported with great care and in a respectful and dignified way. Such ethical considerations should cover the full spectrum of the curatorial process, from what occurs behind the scenes, including storage and handling, to the display of human remains in museum galleries. And I don't think there is anything respectful, dignified, or ethical about the Living Museum. I feel like there is way more to discuss and critique when it comes to the Living Museum, but that is all the energy I have today, folks. In his blurb on the website, Talmi had said that he wanted to improve educational outcomes without sacrificing authenticity or factuality, and it is my personal opinion that he failed. I don't think that the Living Museum can provide you anything that can't already be found on the British Museum's website. Maybe a different way of interacting with the items, but I can't see myself ever using this again for the various reasons that I've laid out in this video, and also some that I just ran out of space for. The exhibit function is trash. It's really bad. I think that a lot of AI developers are trying to get into fields that they have no experience in, and so they're creating these projects that are lackluster at best. The chatbot function is just that. It's a chatbot function based on information that the developer did not recover or compile himself. And there's a lot of ethical dilemmas that we've talked about on this video that have obviously not been considered. If Talmi has reached out to museum professionals to have their feedback or input on this, it isn't obvious from either the about page of the program nor from the execution of this project. The museum field is filled with really passionate people who are vastly underpaid, but here's some guy who thinks he knows better, despite the fact that he has no experience in museums, history, or education. In one of his announcement tweets, Talmi had mentioned that he wanted this project to be additive, and I think that is maybe something that can be done with some work. A lot of work. Tons of work, actually. Metric tons. But Jonathon, Talmi, I want to speak directly to you in the off chance that you've made it this far, or if you've even seen this video. If you want to continue to refine the Living Museum program, you have to talk to museum professionals. And also just do your research. Read about exhibition design and museum ethics and anything that you can get your hands on. There's tons out there. Like I said at the end of my last video, we are never going to be able to time travel. We will never be able to see people in the past. We will never be able to actually speak to these artifacts and hear their story. But museums and academia are as close as we can get to that, and that's okay. I've included some of my more relevant videos in the description, as well as some sources and some further reading if you want to read anything more about what we discussed today. But that is all I've got for you today, folks. I hope that wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever you're doing after this video, I hope it's great, and I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time. Beans is joining me for the rest of the outro. All right, that's all the schmooze I get out of him.